What is up, everybody? Sean Sheehan back here with another edition of the Sheehan Show. And for the first time, I have joined by a fellow media member guest to talk about all things MMA. I'm joined by Ian O'Neill. Today, if you don't know Ian, he is a journalist over with me in Severe MMA. An Irish guy over in Canada, so is great for us because he's up as late as me, to be honest, because I'm kind of on Canadian or on US time as well. And today we're going to talk about all things MMA outside of the UFC. So we have a show over on Severe MMA where we've been doing this for the last year or so we're going to do a bit of that here as well on Sherdog, and we're going to talk a little bit about PFL, Bellator, KSW have a really huge fight coming up, and some Irish stuff as well towards the end of this. Ian, how are things with you? Are you good? I'm glad to be joined by you today.
Thanks for having me on, and thanks to Sherdog as well. I'm looking forward to it. There's been a bunch of stuff happening outside the UFC over the last little while now, so I'm looking forward to breaking it all down and having a chat with you about it. So thanks for having me on.
Indeed, not a bother at all. So let's get straight into it and let's talk about some of the big things. I did a review of the PFL season, and and we've talked about that ourselves as well. So rather than going over that again, I just want to talk about Kayla Harrison, because in that video I mentioned Kayla Harrison and her options and stuff, but a lot has happened since. Dana White has come out and he has basically said, if Kayla Harrison wants to keep earning that big money, she should keep doing it where she is. Like, that sort of thing's not going to happen in the UFC, basically, not in those many words. But then obviously, we had Sinead Kavanagh versus Cyborg happened a couple of weeks ago now at this stage, I suppose. And Chris Cyborg won that fight. Kayla Harrison was their cage side. And Scott Coker was only too happy to talk about Kayla Harrison and possibly signing her as well. So there's a lot of movement with the Kayla Harrison stuff since the last time I maybe spoke about her. Where do you think she's going to go? Because I feel like there's a big difference maybe between where we want her to go as like fans or people covering the sport, and then there seems to be a divide between that and where she's more likely to go. And I suppose where people want her to go is to the UFC to fight Amanda Nunes, because Amanda Nunes has very little challengers. But where she will go is probably to Bellator to fight Cyborg, who also has very little challengers, if we're being honest. So it's a similar sort of equation, I suppose, but still, I suppose the fact that Amanda Nunes has beaten Cyborg, a lot of people want her to go there. What's your take on it with Kayla Harrison, and maybe what the move will be next?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest stories in mixed martial arts right now is where she's going to go. Looking at Kayla Harrison and looking at her from previous seasons in the PFL and this season, I think this season in particular, and what has happened and the interviews she's given and how much she's put herself out there, she's really turned herself into a superstar in the making, really, to be honest. And, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because, we talked about Bellator there, we talked about the UFC as well, but the other option is that she goes back and fights at the PFL for another season as well. She has that guaranteed. You would be almost guaranteed to be winning that million again if she was to go in there and compete in the next season. The talent pool isn't all that rich out there, the 155-pound division. But I think the decision on what's next will be made by Kayla Harrison and Kayla Harrison only, and that's what she wants for her career. Does she want to go and make easy money into PFL, or does she want to go and challenge herself and possibly go to Bellator or go to the UFC and get those challenges there? Because, there's a difference between wanting to make that money and there's another difference between these fighters wanting to test themselves at the highest level. And at the end of the day, all these fighters are competitors, and she's a competitor as well. So I'm just wondering if we're going to, I think in an ideal world, we would get the best of everything, where she might maybe sign for a couple of fights with Bellator before moving on to the UFC. But, she's not really that young in her career. She started her mixed martial arts career rather late after competing in the Olympics. So I I was more looking for her to go to the UFC at the very start, but I mean, is it going to be a signing up with the UFC and being one and done? If she fights and loses to Amanda Nunes, then what do you do with her there? Where I think that you could maybe sign with Bellator, and there are some good matchups there in the 145-pound division. You wouldn't necessarily have to throw her straight in there with Cyborg. You could get her in there at Bellator. You could get her hooked up with a couple of fights just to build her name under the promotion, and then maybe towards the end of next year you could do that big Cyborg versus Harrison fight.
Do you know one thing that's funny though as well? I think you mentioned going back to the PFL. The one thing that the PFL has this year or next season is Julia Budd. Like, Julia Budd is, like, if you take away the top three, which are Harrison, Cyborg, and Nunes, you could absolutely argue that Julia Budd is the next best. So it's kind of funny, we have that the one challenger maybe that she was kind of crying out for. We thought it'd be Sarah Kaufman a few years ago, but it's, I think Sarah is a great fighter down through the years, but I think she's a little bit past her best now. So you have Julia Budd over in the PFL, and you mentioned going back for another year. If the option was to go to the UFC and have a few fights and then fight Amanda Nunes, or it was to stay in the PFL, fight Julia Budd, maybe, if they could set that up for it to be the finale, that would be huge, because I feel like that would be something that was kind of undeniable. Even for Dana White, I think it'd probably be undeniable, because what you're really asking, if Kayla Harrison goes straight to the UFC, and I doubt she's getting a title fight straight away. I think she should, but I think Dana White would probably want to give her one, whether it's a Durandamy or a Holly Holm or something like that. You are asking her to go in to have a fight against someone who is really high level, like one of the two women I mentioned there, and risk losing not only the fight, but also the prospect of winning that $1 million, and that is a lot. Like, I think the UFC, if they really want Kayla Harrison, if they really want someone to test Amanda Nunes, and I'm not sure they do in terms of like either of those things if it costs them too much money, but they're going to have to pay some money if they want to get that. And if they want to continue to call themselves like the world leader of MMA, where all the best fights happen, they're going to have to pay the money for that to happen in that division for Amanda Nunes. They let Cyborg go, and she was obviously the next best, as we all know that. And I think if the UFC don't do it, they should be widely criticized. I think, like, if the UFC let Kayla Harrison go to someone else, it's a sign they're letting without a shadow of a doubt, one of the best fighters in the world go somewhere else. And your point is on, and I'll throw it back to you here, and then we'll move on from maybe this discussion, because we don't want to take up the whole time doing this. But we, as people covering Irish MMA for the last while, we've talked a lot about fighters, going to Bellator for a while, say having a 3 or 5 fight contract, maybe winning, say if it's 5 fights, winning 5 of them, or 4 and 1 or whatever, getting good money, good experience, and then going to the UFC. But it hasn't happened for anyone yet. It hasn't happened for anyone. Like, James Gallagher is still there. Will Fleury is out of there now, but it doesn't look like he's going straight to the UFC. We talked about Danny Nealon a couple of weeks ago with Bellator not having that division, and we'll talk more about Irish people in the end. But I feel like that road from Bellator for a few fights and then on to the UFC is not that possible, especially for someone like Kayla Harrison, who, if all goes well, if it goes badly and she loses to Cyborg, the UFC are going to be like, well, we told you so, and we don't want her anyway, and if it goes well, she'll be a champion, and it'll be very hard to get out of that contract. So it's a tough situation. Like, I'll throw it to you for the final remarks, but I feel like a deal needs to be done here. The UFC and Kayla Harrison need to do a deal. Okay, if Kayla has to take a little bit less money to get a couple of fights, so she gets Amanda Nunes and then earns big money, or gets money for a big pay-per-view fight, and they pay her for that, the UFC should agree to pay her for that big fight, the big money fight against Amanda Nunes, because it is, people will want to see Amanda Nunes challenge, and will want to see her fight against Kayla Harrison. So look, a short-term blow for Kayla might lead to a long-term windfall, but that long-term windfall has to be paid by the UFC as well. Will it be? I don't think so, and I think she'll probably end up in Bellator. What's your sense for her?
Yeah, I think I agree with pretty much all you said there. I think the likely outcome of this scenario will be either Kayla Harrison re-signs with the PFL and then signs with the UFC a year down the line, or she just straight up signs with Bellator now, and I think that's the UFC dead and buried now. So it'll be very interesting to see what she does. And I mean, for her, if she's a businesswoman, she'll go and she'll make her money, and fair play to her. She should do that. But if she wants to test and she wants to create a legacy for herself, the only way to do that, I feel, for her is in the UFC.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. And that actually leads us nicely onto our next topic here. And it's funny because over the last year, maybe, Scott Coker has been saying the same sort of thing over and over, right? He said there, the division I like to call the cruiserweight division of Bellator, the 205-pound light heavyweight division. He keeps saying it's the best division in the world, or the best 205-pound division in the world. And look, it's a pretty good division. They have Bader, and they have Nemkov, and they have Beast in 25-8, and they have a few more very, very good fighters. Even Anglicus, he almost knocked out Nemkov in the first round of that fight, but I think he's a good fighter. And they have Anthony Johnson, they have Yoel Romero, now is also a pretty good division. And also, he said AJ McKee is the best 145-pounder in the world. He said Patricio was before that. And I wouldn't completely rule that out. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Max Holloway and Volkanovski are fantastic fighters as well. And Yair Rodriguez put himself in that discussion as well recently. If I was talking to someone, I was like, imagine Yair Rodriguez versus AJ McKee, what a fight that would be. But anyway, the wider point here is with Kayla Harrison and with Cyborg as well. Let's say Kayla Harrison goes in there and she destroys Cyborg, and let's say they fight again and she destroys her again. Can she be proven as the best 145-pounder in the world outside of the UFC? Can AJ McKee do the same? Can Bader do the same? Or Nemkov do the same? Or, whoever it might be, Khalidov over in KSW, or, a heavyweighted PFL or something like that. Do you think it is possible in 2021 for a fighter to prove themselves as the best fighter in the world outside of the UFC?
I think the simple answer to that question is a no. And I think it goes back to just what we were talking about, Kayla Harrison, is that does she want to look after herself in a business sense of terms, or does she want to prove herself as an athlete? Does she want to prove herself as a fighter and create a legacy for herself? And her and AJ McKee both have the same. Now, what AJ McKee has is a little bit more time on his side to make that happen. I do think that, if we go back through history, the biggest question ever surrounded Fedor Emelianenko. He competed in all facets of all different promotions and was very successful and was touted as the greatest heavyweight of all time. But even to this day, that question mark looms over his head on whether he would have been able to do it against the highest level of heavyweights in the UFC at that time. Yes, he did it against former UFC challengers, but he didn't do it inside the octagon. And I don't see that question ever disappearing. And it's just maybe a sad reality of the mixed martial arts landscape right now, is that, you have to go over to the UFC if you want to truly prove yourself as a fighter and to be touted as one of the best in the world.
I would tend to agree, but I agree on I agree on one set of terms, but on another set of terms, I also called Demetrious Johnson the best fighter in the world. Now, he was in the UFC, but the people argued because of the level of competition that he thought he wasn't. Now, that's a bit of balderdash as well, because he was fighting Haraguchi, he was fighting Joseph Benavidez, he was fighting Henry Cejudo and beating all of them twice in the case of Henry Cejudo and Benavidez. But, so I don't necessarily just think you need to be beating all the best people in the world to show your awesome skill set. Now, when you get to the very top, it happens a lot, even in the UFC, like someone like in Israel Adesanya, where he kind of runs out of challengers a bit. Like, he's fighting Whittaker again. That's a very good fight, and I think it's a worthy rematch, and he's a worthy challenger, don't get me wrong. But I don't think the likes of, say, Vettori and others in the weak division are up there near someone like Israel Adesanya. And you see, even when he goes to 205 and fights someone very good as well, he loses, and not necessarily just because he lost, but it's a bigger challenge. So I think the ability to show your skill set is a bigger factor in who the best fighter in the world is than the opposition you beat. Now, the opposition you beat is also huge. It might be 51-49, but I truly believe it's the skill set that makes you the best and not the competition. Like, it's funny to say, are you the best? Well, who's your opponent? That's it's a weird, and it is a weird thing to say, but if you really think about it, I put a lot of thought into this, and there's some people find ways of beating people, but other people are like the best fighter in the world, and the ways they beat people are just different. Now, the thing about it is, because it is close, 51-49% on my thinking, and I'm probably a way ahead of most other people. I think most other people would say it the other way. It's still very close, and you still need to beat those people, and you still need to beat good people. But say the likes of AJ McKee, he has beaten Patricio. Patricio is a fantastic fighter, and if he goes and beats him again, fantastic. If he steps up to 155 and beats Patrici and whoever, Usman or Magomedov or whoever else is there, there's no doubt in that. He is one of the best fighters in the world, whether he's in the UFC or outside of the UFC. And I feel like you're right in terms of, like, there'll always be that question. But I think if someone could say what Fedor did and beat all, like, the best in the world, and, from guys coming up from light heavyweight and all different weight classes, and this is a different time back then, make no mistake about that. But I feel like that circumstance, which is going to be very rare these days, is something someone maybe only like AJ McKee could do. Like, even Kayla Harrison can't really do it while Amanda Nunes is around, because there aren't enough people to beat. If she beats Cyborg, there's really no one else. Julia Budd is a good win as well, but Amanda Nunes has a win over Julia Budd as well, doesn't she? Or am I gone mad way back in the day? But
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a debate that is like 99% a pointless debate to have, because the obvious answer is no. But in a certain set of circumstances, with someone who has an elite skill set, just like AJ McKee has, I think it is possible. What do you think of the 205 pound debate about the division in Bellator being better than the division in UFC? Because I think that's a lot closer of a debate.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot closer of a debate, and I agree with what you're saying too about the showcasing your skill set. Like, I mean, I would agree with you 100% that AJ McKee and Pitbull would be top 5 competitors in the UFC, no problem at all, if they were in that. Like, and that doesn't matter whether they join the UFC or whether they're not in the UFC. We watch fighters, we know how skillful they are, and we can see it inside the UFC, we can see it outside of the UFC too. So, I mean, when it comes to the 205 pound division, there is probably one of the scariest 205ers out there right now is Vadim Nemkov. So, I mean, he has an abundance of challengers there. The Grand Prix is going off relatively okay for Bellator right now. They have a couple of little blips with injuries and stuff. But, I mean, I think what Bellator have right now in their 205 pound division is a well-established division with a lot of veterans and a lot of experience in there, in comparison to the UFC, which kind of has a mixture of older guys and experience at the upper end of the division, and it's a division that's slowly building underneath as well. So I think that both divisions are kind of in different kind of scenarios, if you want to call it that, right now. But I would be leaning towards Bellator being the stronger of the two right now. So, which proves what our talking point here and right now.
That's very interesting. I would agree. Like, Bellator, I think maybe the top 5 of Bellator is added all together might be stronger than the top 5 of the UFC, are very close anyway. But I think, say, the top 20 of the UFC is probably much stronger. But, like, if you look at, say, the likes of Prochazka coming through, and it's funny, Glover Teixeira is the champion now. You'd almost forget it at times in the UFC.
Yeah.
You know, what a legend. But, you know, Prochazka's coming through there as well. You still have Blachowicz. You know, you have the likes of Johnny Walker even now in the top 15, and Rakic and Anthony Smith is coming back again. But, like, that
there's one guy on the come up there in the UFC, and that's Mamed Ankalaev. Yeah, and I think that he's going to be a major player in the UFC 205 division in over the next year, I think.
Who do you think is the best 205er in the world right now? Like with John Jones gone, let's say.
With John Jones gone, the best 205er in the world right now, I think it's I might be controversial, but I fancy Jiří Procházka to be the next champion in the UFC, and I think that he's damn close. I think if he was fighting anybody else other than Glover Teixeira, if that fight does go happen, I think that's kind of a bad matchup for him. Like, skills wise, I think Glover is a really good grappler, and we have not seen too much of Procházka on the map. But I think that he is bringing he's bringing a game that no one has ever seen before. He's a unique style, and it's not easy to kind of train for. And he has ridiculous knockout power, and he's not afraid to put himself in the line of fire to get off that power too. So I'd be very interested to see what happens with him. So I think it would be him, and then it probably would be a mix between Glover Teixeira, Vadim Nemkov. I think battling for second and third spots, and I might lean a little bit more towards Vadim Nemkov in that situation rather than Glover Teixeira.
My memory is terrible. Didn't Nemkov and Prochazka fought before, haven't they, a good while ago? But that'd be an interesting one as well. But like, Nemkov is so good. I think the thing with Nemkov is as well, though, he's beatable in some ways. You know, he's one of those lads where it's, and I think that's the thing with
I think every time that you don't beat him, though, is the time he's going to get better.
Oh, that's 100%. That's a great point. Absolutely, 100%. Absolutely. And it's a little bit scary that he's winning so much while still being like a little bit beatable. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what's next from him here. Okay, let's move on here and talk about a few more things. We'll do a few quick hits here and talk about them. One FC, one championship now, we're due to have a card, and that has been postponed until the new year because of COVID, I believe. I know that the president was over on Ari Helwani's show announcing the card, and then it was cancelled and everything like that. So it will. I think it'll take place in the new year. I know you're looking forward to that big fight. You know, we mentioned Demetrious Johnson, the greatest of all time, in my opinion. It's a pity that card has been cancelled, didn't it? And that mixed rule fight against Rodtang. What was it supposed to be? 1 round of MMA or 1 round of kickboxing? And then what was it?
We had round 1, 5 minutes of Muay Thai. We had round 2, 5 minutes of mixed martial arts, and round 3 a mixed bag. And I mean, that's all I'm looking for in a fight, man.
Let's have some fun.
Unreal.
Let's have some. Yeah, it's an awful pity that was cancelled. Like, I feel like, you know, sometimes in MMA, we're, with this Mayweather and McGregor stuff, and people are talking about, what if it was in 4 ounce gloves, or what if it was a boxing match in a cage, or, what if kicks were allowed and stuff like that. I feel like those questions are very annoying when it is like, maybe the people who are, like McGregor at the time was a champion, are right at the top of the world, and we want to see him like the Findy title, or we want to see him fight Habib, or we want to see him fight in MMA fights. I think Demetrious Johnson has kind of taken the role of, right, I'm no longer in talks to be like the best in the world or the UFC champion. I'll go and fight in one and have fun fights, and I'll fight for the title if the title is there. And obviously he lost the title as well, but he's like, I'm willing to partake in these fun fights and do fun stuff. And that's grand. Like Anderson Silva boxing, I've no problem with that. I think that's been great fun and everything like that. It fulfills that want, doesn't it, for like the bad.
It does, of course. Like, and if, to just piggyback off your comparison, like when what we were dealing with Conor at that time was a guy who was at the top of his game. And he just produced a fantastic performance against Eddie Alvarez, and he left us wanting more at that time. And then he went off and we went boxing, where in comparison to what you said about Mighty Mouse and what you said about Anderson Silva, both fighters have been there and they've done it all. They have their multiple UFC title defenses. They're going down in UFC Hall of Fame. They're probably thinking the same as what we're thinking. Let's have some fucking fun. Let's make some money. So, you know what I mean? And I'm all for that, man. I mean, I was like, when I saw that fight was announced, I was like, Christmas has come early, baby. I just couldn't wait to see it.
But Christmas is going to come late now anyway.
No, it's going to be a late one. It's going to be
maybe an early Easter or something. We'll never know. But we'll look forward to that in the new year anyway. Another big fight that's happening, I believe it's before Christmas, isn't it, is Mamed Khalidov versus Roberto Soldic. And now, we'll probably talk about this fight more when it comes up in a few weeks. But to me, if people don't know these too well, and sometimes it's hard to keep a track of KSW. We've Sean Denny, who we talked a lot over, who keeps real track of that, and he does some great stuff. So check out his previews and things like that. And he's really owning that, talking about KSW and that scene. But these, Soldic is a guy, anytime Soldic fights, I'm tuning in, because he is just an assassin of a fighter, and everyone should know Khalidov. If you're listening to this, if you're on this website or on this YouTube, you should know Mamed Khalidov is a legend of the scene. One of the guys outside of the UFC who people should be talking about it. An old man now, but still killing it. And this fight, this is a real super fight, a non-UFC fight. Like, this is one of the best fights you can possibly get. We talk about AJ McKee and Patricio. This is that level of fight, and I am really, really looking forward to this. I think every MMA fan, you know, who loves high level MMA should be tuning into this one. I think Soldic is up there with anyone outside of the UFC as the best fighter in the world. I really do. I think he's right. I think even into the UFC, he caused problems. And, you know, he's one of these guys, people look at his record and, you know, he's a couple of losses and he lost back in the day in was it in Cage Warriors and places and things? Sure. But, like, MMA, people improve. You know, fighters get better all the time. I think at the moment, he is an absolute killer. And I fancy him to beat Khalidov, but never, ever rule out Khalidov. He is an animal of a fighter. What are your anticipation levels? I know over in Canada maybe a little bit different. We're closer here and it's on at a better time for us. What's your anticipation levels for that one?
Well, like, good fights are good fights, and that's what I'm in for. And this is a good fight. This is probably one of the best fights you'll see outside of the UFC right now. We said that about Pitbull and McKee, and this is on a par, if not even more exciting, because I don't think that this fight doesn't deliver. Like, I think these two guys are absolute killers. You know, I think Soldic is moving up in weight class, and he has a chance to become a double champ. Would I be correct in saying that?
God, I can't remember now. Yeah, it is. It is a champ versus a champ, so yeah, I think he is. I think you're right, but we will confirm that afterwards. But yeah,
I think he's moving up from the welterweight division up into the middleweight division to take on Khalidov. So I mean, he has a chance to become a double champion. It's Khalidov's job to defend his crown, and like you said, that man is not easy beat. You're going to have to get that man out of there if you want to win that fight. And you know, he's come back from both guys have really come back from disappointments in their career, but they're both firing at all cylinders now. This is the biggest fight that KSW can make. It's the biggest fight that you'll see probably in Europe this year. And I think that it's going to be an absolute barn burner, and I can't wait to see. It'll be actually the day I'm over in Canada right now. It'll be going on the day I land home in Ireland, so I'll be able to catch.
We'll meet. We'll head on to Poland all together, and we'll
go over and meet John over there.
Let's get straight on the plane at Dublin Airport and go. Next stop Warsaw. Come on, we'll go. We'll head over, lads. We'll meet you over there. But that should be absolutely brilliant, and I can't wait for that one. Right, the last few minutes here, let's talk a little bit about the few Irish MMA fighters. No, we talked a lot about Irish MMA. I have on this podcast and different things, but usually, you know, the ones at the top like Ian Gary and Sinead Kavanagh and those. But I think first of all, and we'll kind of talk about Irish MMA adjunct to Mexican MMA or Latin American MMA, maybe you could call it, with Combates America. So Palahan from here in Ireland has fought in Combates 5 or 6 times? Well, no, 3 or 4 times? Although not all of them. If you look at his Sherdog record, there, thanks to someone I
wonder what happened there.
No idea. I've never heard about it. And also Franz Malambo has taken a fight over there as well. Oh, I know you watch a lot of Combates. Obviously it's on a better time for you and you can actually watch it over there. I think it's impossible to get it here, but it seems like, I know it's very tough with Campbell as well, and if he sees this he'll probably go mad at me, but Campbell Mclaren, you don't know what's true and what's not true with him, but what is true is they're getting huge TV ratings over in America and in the Latin Americas, in the Americas I suppose you could call it. They have a huge, Latin American fan base. They're doing good things. Look, we could talk about the adjustments they need to make. I don't need these one-round tour or one-night tournaments and the one-round fights and stuff. And that's why we're kind of joking about the records. Like, do those fights count or do they not fight? You're still going in there taking the damage and doing all that. But I suppose you're still getting paid as well. But first of all, before we get maybe to the Irish fighters, you can jump onto them as well. But what do you think of Combates America as a promotion itself?
Yeah, just to speak a little bit about Campbell Mclaren, if there's any maybe newer MMA fans watching who had been responsible and one of the owners and the founders of UFC before it was sold off to Fertitta Brothers and stuff. So, he would have built that from the ground. And he started Combate. It would have been Combate Americas first, which would have just focused on a lot of South American fighters and Latino fighters and in around Mexico as well. And he has since turned that into Combate Global, which is going to try and put on, I think, 22 shows in total, and a couple of those will be international next year as well. So he's starting to build this promotion from the ground up as well.
Allegedly, I'll put there.
Allegedly, like you said, Campbell is good at dishing out these stats and facts and stuff like that. So we'll wait and see what happens. Mm-hmm. I mean, but he's done quite well. I mean, what he's resorted to is what he resorted to back in the day, and that's tournament form competition. So he's putting on a lot of these 4-man tournaments, 8-man tournaments. Pa's gone over there specifically to compete in a 4-man tournament earlier on this year in August or September. And then just last week, he competed on 6 days' notice in an 8-man one-night tournament, which would have been a quarter-final, which would have been 5 minutes long, a semi-finals that would have been 5 minutes long, and then the finals would have been the 3-round normal sort of a fight, if you want to call it that. So he's building it. He says he's getting the audience. He reckons that a quarter or 3/4 of a million people watched the last show, and they're on a big Mexican TV channel and on another couple of TV channels there, Paramount Plus in the States as well. So it's freely available. I mean, I had to take a trip to Mexico maybe to watch myself but
I often visit you over in Canada to watch Bellator and everything. Like, we're all
wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
VPN airlines. It's brilliant.
he seems to that seems to be what he's good at. Building those tournament style, building those fighters. We've seen a couple of them creep over into the UFC too, a couple of Combate fighters. Pa himself, went over and competed in the lightweight division. The 4-man tournament that he won earlier on in the year opened up the spot that Franz is going to take for the year-end tournament, which is going to be competed at £135. And it's the Copa, it's the Combate Gloabl or something like that.
Yeah. But Franz Mambo, people who would know him, he's obviously fought in Bellator, and he's, teammates at McGregor and stuff, and he was in the camp for the Mayweather fight, was one of his main sparring partners, and he's the FEN champion as well at the moment, isn't he? He's going, like, Franz is low-key one of the best fighters in Ireland at the moment, and going over there to compete, he'd have to be the favourite for that tournament.
Absolutely. There's 100,000 on the line for the winner here, and he is a damn good fucking chance of bringing that money home, and he's going to represent Ireland in the tournament. And I think the tournament itself there's going to be 8 or 16 different countries being competing in it, from fighters from different parts of the world. So I mean, we've seen Franz fight from the very start, and he's a very, very, very skilled fighter, and he's dangerous on the feet, dangerous off the mat, and I would give him a very, very good chance now, without knowing too much about anybody else that's competing in the tournament. But I mean, he's going to be one of the top dogs in that competition for sure, and I'll be excited to see it go down.
Without a doubt. Right, a few more things. Actually, we were going to talk about Cage Warriors. We're a little bit stuck for time, so we'll wait, because I'll have a full Cage Warriors preview out on Sherdog, and we will see how that goes, and I'll have a couple of interviews as well, one lined up for next week with a couple of the Cage Warriors cards. But just to, I suppose, quickly mention, at the moment, Cage Warriors always announce fights late and stuff like that, and we're 2 weeks or a little bit more even than 2 weeks out from it, I think, are we? So keep an eye on the YouTube here and on Twitter and everything like that for updates on Cage Warriors. But one big thing from Cage Warriors that has happened this week, one of their signed fighters, Paul Redmond, has retired. And obviously, anyone who knows Paul Redmond, he went into the UFC fighting at 145 pounds. I remember talking to him a couple of weeks after he fought over, and I think it was over in Scotland, and he was saying, like, I got hit with this shot that I've got hit with 1,000 times before, and it put me out this time, and it's never happened to me in my life before. It was one of those where he just
he cut a massive amount of weight for that fight in a short period of time too. Yeah.
And then he was talking this week in his retirement about, like, the injuries popping up and hard to get, the right fights at the right time. Like in Bellator, he got he had that one big fight. Who was, I can't remember. He had one big fight anyway against a big name, and it fell through. And then he should have got main event spots or co-main event spots at one stage at least, and he didn't end up getting them. And I think when that sort of happens, and when your kind of promotion isn't behind you like that in certain ways, I think it's tough, and in the injuries adding up. Now he's back in Cage Warriors, where I think they wanted to give him good fights. You know, he was supposed to fight Bin Lakhtar, wasn't he, in his last fight? Now Bin Lakhtar's fighting for the championship. So if that fight had happened and Paul had won, he'd probably be fighting for the title. But I think injuries have just added up, and it's a tough time. And I think he just finished college and things like that, and you know, he's working and things, and you know, it's a tough life for an MMA fighter who's injured a lot, and who, you know, the big promotions, he had the run there, and he'd have to have probably another big run to get back there. But what a legend of the game, like always exciting. One of the lads that, you know, I remember one of the first events I ever went to, a Cage Warriors event, I was like going up to get my Leonard or whatever it was, and he was in front of me, and he turned around, he said, "Oh, hello Sean, how are you?" And like, one of that means a lot to someone when it's like their first event that they're ever covering and stuff. And I'll always be I'll always be thankful to him for just a few words before then. But you know, his toe holds, I suppose, he's known very well for a guy who like constantly improved, and who the fans were always there for. Like, even I think it was that event where he was fighting one of the Cage Warriors events, he got the loudest pop of the night. He was always a fan favorite as well. And you know, I've a lot of time for Paul Redmond, and the scene will definitely miss him. You know, he might be back. You never know when MMA retirements. But as we speak now, brilliant. What were your thoughts on Paul Redmond? I suppose
he's an absolute legend of Irish MMA. I mean, you know, doing everything that he did and achieving everything that he did, and fought in almost every single major promotion that there is. And at the same time, he was working a full-time job for most of that time as well, you know, on the building sites as well. You know, an absolute gentleman. And that's why there was such a huge reaction when he did announce his retirement, because, you know, he said he didn't make it. He said himself he didn't think he made a huge impact, but I think he made a much bigger of an impact than he ever thought. I thought he's a legend. He'll always be remembered. You know, when he wasn't fighting at events, he was spinning the decks at events as well. I had the privilege to see him fight live a couple of times, and you know, I wish him all the best in his retirement. I hope, you know, he still stays in the game and uses his intelligence and the skills and experience that he's built up through the years, and passes them along to other fighters at Team Rhino as well, and that will help anybody in that gym tremendously too. And I wish him the best, and if it is the end for him, good for him. He should be very proud of himself for what he has achieved.
Yeah, he's a very good referee as well. If anyone, he's refereed in local shows here and stuff. So as a lad who loves the old officiating, I wouldn't mind seeing Paul Redmond doing a few more. And you know, maybe that's the way he gets back into the big shows, doing a little bit more refereing and stuff.
Yeah, like that, so. It'd be a shame to just see him fall into I don't think so. I don't think he will. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the future holds for him.
Yeah, 100%. Right, we will leave it at that for this episode. Obviously, actually, we forgot to mention as well Lee Hammond out of SBG. He's a prospect. He's 1-0 now. Won his MMA debut there last week as well. Definitely a guy you need to keep an eye out for. You know, world class jiu-jitsu player out of Ireland, or you know, one of the best anyway. Has been, you know, one of the mainstays of SBG for a long time, and really had a great amateur career. So definitely keep an eye out for him as well. So that's the Irish MMA side of it. We talked about PFL, Bellator, you know, over in Poland, and a bit of Asian MMA as well. So worldwide
around the world in 30 minutes.
Around the world in 30 minutes, indeed. Ian, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Follow him over on Twitter at @IO'Neill MMA. My name is Sean Sheehan for Sherdog.com. We'll see you all next time.